And we're back on the record. This is a case, State of Ohio versus Michael T. Dixon. And Mr. Dixon's present along with his attorneys, and the prosecution team is here. And bring the next witness in, please, Charles.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please raise your right hand. Solemnly swear testimony you're about to provide in this cause is truth, whole truth, and nothing but truth, so help you God.
I do.
All right, thank you. Please come around and have a seat. And please pull the microphone in front of you. And if you could remove your mask, please. Go ahead, Mr. Pearson.
Thank you, Your Honor. Could you state your name, spelling your last name for the record, sir?
Keegan, Rose, R-O-S-E.
No. Yes. Your Honor,
Yes,
would you like to inquire with Mr. Rose about media publication of his
Oh, yeah,
case?
thank you for reminding me about that. There are reporters that are watching this remotely, and they may want to use your picture. However, you have the right to say no. And you want them to be able to use your picture, or would you rather not?
Yes, they can.
They can? Okay,
Yep.
so they can photograph you then. All right. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Rose, can you spell your first name?
K-E-E-G-A-N.
All right. And last name is Rose, correct?
Yep.
All right. Mr. Rose, where are you employed?
I am employed I work for Hocking County EMS, and then I am a subcontractor for the Hocking County Coroner's office. I also work for the City of Logan Fire Department part-time.
So you're a subcontractor for the coroner's office here in Hocking County,
Yes.
and you know that's the job we're going to be talking most about, correct?
Yes.
And I didn't hear that first position. Was it an EMS?
Yes.
For where? What agency?
Hocking County.
And a firefighter job?
Yep.
Where's that?
Part-time for the City of Logan.
Okay. Those keep you busy?
Yes.
All right. Where did you go to school, Keegan?
I went to Logan High School.
And since the majority of what you'll be talking about today deals with your subcontractor work for the coroner's office, can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how long you've been a subcontractor with the coroner's office, or how that relationship began?
So I've been with them for about 4 years now. Started off in the fire and EMS, and then the coroner himself reached out to me and asked me if I'd be interested in helping him. So then about 4 years ago is when I really started getting involved in helping him out and training along with him. That's where I do all my training and stuff, is along with the coroner himself.
Okay, who is the coroner himself?
Dave Cummins.
Dr. Dave Cummins?
Yep.
All right. So what type of things do you do for the Hocking County Coroner's Office?
I go out, I photo the scene, take photos of everything that's going on. I gather very basic information of who we are there for, why we're there, information of the victim, and then once I get all my photos taken care of, I contact a funeral home, and then we determine if Dave does not come out with me, I'll get a hold of him, and we determine that if we need to do an autopsy. And if we do an autopsy, we contact one of the funeral homes in Hocking County, and then they will take the body to Montgomery County for autopsy.
Why does the Montgomery County's office get involved for autopsies?
We used to go to Franklin County. I'm not 100% sure on the reasons switching to Montgomery County, but we've used Montgomery County for the last probably 2 or 3 years now for all of our autopsies.
Okay, and that would be the Montgomery County's Coroner's Office? So just to be clear, no autopsies are performed here in Hawken County?
No.
That's another position that's
Yep.
subcontracted out?
Yes.
You indicated before the autopsies used to go to Franklin County?
Yes.
Or come from Franklin County, now they come from Montgomery County?
Yes.
Do you recall how long that's been the case?
I'm not exact sure on
Okay.
the dates.
All right. Did you have any training with respect to your position?
All my training has come from Dr. Dave Cummin himself. That's who I have done all my training through.
Okay, and tell us what type of training you have received.
We have just done a lot of hands-on stuff, and then a lot of it's looking back at cases and discussing cases and what we see and what we have been, everything comes back to just what cases we study on, and then we train off each case, basically, is how we train.
Okay, so you go out and perform your duties and responsibilities on a particular case, is that right?
Yes.
And then when you come back and after your job duties are completed, you kind of have a debrief with Dr. Cummins, is
Yes.
that right? Okay. Talk about the things you did well,
Yep.
not well, things you could have done better on.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to direct your attention to a place on Chestnut Grove Road. Do you recall going out there?
Yes.
All right. Tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how that came about.
It would have been July 28th. In the morning, we received a call. Dave reached out to the 3 investigators that work for him, me being one of them, and asked us if we were available to go out and handle a possible homicide case. The other 2 were at work, and it was my off day from the fire department, so I was available to go. So when I went out there, I got on scene. The sheriff's office had already been there prior to our arrival. When we got on scene, we sat on scene for probably half hour or so, waiting for BCI to get there and get their things rolling. And then after BCI had started, myself was along with one of the other BCI members started gathering outside scene photos of everything that had gone on.
Okay. A few follow-up questions, all right? You indicated there are other people you work with.
Yes.
Who are those people?
Lynn Worthman, he is an investigator. And then Stacy Sams is one of our other investigators. And then we have another guy who subcontracts out also. He does not get used very often, which is Tom Mormon. He did, however, go out that day with me because he has a fire investigation background. So circumstances at hand of what we thought we were going out to deal with, we asked Tom to go along with us.
Okay. Was the sheriff's office able to provide you a lot of information prior to going out to this dig site or to this site?
They were able to give us some information. Wasn't a whole lot. We had a little bit more once we got on scene, but prior to, we did not have a whole lot of information.
Okay. Is that typical?
It just varies from case to case, honestly.
All right. How many sites have you gone to in your career as a subcontractor with the Hawken County Coroner's Office?
That I don't even have an exact number. I mean, it's quite a few.
Okay. More than 10?
Yes.
More than 50?
I would say probably close to 50, if not just a little more.
Okay. And what do your duties and responsibilities entail when you arrive at a scene?
So when I arrive on scene, depending on what the case is, I usually will start by gathering photos starting on the outside, if it happens within a residence or if it's on the outside of a residence, but I always start by gathering scene photos. After scene photos, I will talk to the deputy or detectives from the sheriff's office that are on scene, get some information from them, and then we go from there on deciding if we need to go to for autopsy, and if that's the case, then we follow up with getting a funeral home en route to us, making contact with the patient's family, and so on.
Is that what you did in this particular case?
So in this particular case, we arrived on scene, waited for BCI, then we went and grabbed our photos. And then family, I did not have any part in contact with the family. I believe the sheriff's office had that, and that also had gone through the coroner himself, Dr. Dave Cummin.
Okay. All right, before I interrupted you, you were actually going into a little bit detail about you arriving with the other investigators. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Did you immediately know what to do? Or were you kind of giving tasks or assigning tasks?
So when I first arrived on scene, we knew that we were going to have to dig in a burn pile of trash, but we did not start that dig until the BCI was ready to start that dig. We kind of waited on BCI. We worked a lot right along their side at that, so we waited for them to finish up a few things they did inside the house. And once they were done inside the residence, we went outside and prepped for the dig.
BCI is whom?
Bureau of Criminal Investigation.
All right. And that is essentially the state of Ohio's police force, is that correct? And they send investigators out to various crime scenes. Is that
Yep.
right? You've worked with them before?
Yes.
How did you begin this dig?
So the sheriff's office went out however they caught their wind of it and their tip-offs, they went out immediately to this address that they were given and placed a tarp over top of the pile of trash, the burn pile that was there, because there was rain coming in that night possibly. So then that next morning, once we were ready to start the dig, we started layer by layer. We started at the top of the burn pile because it kind of went over a hillside, and we started at the top, and then slowly, layer by layer, just was peeling the trash back and the clothing back that was there, and started to slowly dig. And as we went layer by layer, we took photos as we were coming across different things, and then as we got deeper and deeper is when we started to find just small chunks of bone fragments. Things were very unidentifiable, so as we started to find the bone fragments towards the bottom of the burn pile over the hillside, we took those pieces and placed them on a table up at the top of the hill, and then once we were done, one of the BCI members started to take those pieces and individually wrap each one in a piece of foil. Then they were placed into small boxes.
Okay. What was the purpose of placing them in the foil?
I think it was more of just to keep everything contained, and then that way they could identify the different pieces.
What was the purpose in placing those items into boxes?
To place them into boxes was a much easier way for transport because there were so many small, tiny pieces.
Okay. Did you all just go to the site and just start digging and looking underneath the trash and things like that for the bones?
There was 4 of us that did the dig, and yes, we did start digging right away, but we had someone that took lead. So somebody called the shots of where we were going to start, how we were going to do it, when to stop for each layer, and that person that took lead was one of the BCI members.
Okay, and I may have missed this before. Can you talk about that again for me, about layers and how you dug that day?
So the way we dug it was there was so much trash and debris in this area. We'd moved so much, we'd stop, we'd gather photos, and that's what they're considering layer by layer. So, we'd maybe move, I don't know how much exactly we'd take off the top, but we'd move stuff off the top, what we hadn't seen before, stop, grab some photos, and then move some more stuff.
About how long were you out there, Keegan?
I would say roughly we were there for probably 3 to 4 hours.
I showed you some photographs earlier, right?
Yes.
Those look familiar to you, correct?
Yes.
What were those photographs of?
The photos that you showed me were the photos from around the property, and then also photos of the dig site.
Okay. Keegan, does that look familiar to you?
Yes.
All right, and these are all the series and states exhibit I. Keegan, there's about, I don't know, maybe 15 items here. I'd like for you to describe each one as I click through them. Would that be okay?
Yes.
All right. What do we have here in the first photograph?
So in this first photo, you have that is the initial debris field of what was all in that burn pile.
Next photograph.
That is a photo from the very top of the burn pile.
And we see a lot of
pop cans, just a lot of ordinary house trash.
Next photo.
That is another picture from the side of the burn. There was a lot of clothing there. BCI did take a lot of that clothing to test for DNA. Other than then, a lot more trash, obviously.
Okay. Are you in this photograph?
Yes.
Okay, where are you?
I'm the one in the black t-shirt.
You're over, I guess, on the far left side with blue gloves on. Is that you?
I'm in the black t-shirt, brown pants, with right behind the guy holding the shirt up.
Okay. Next photograph.
That is about halfway down in the burn pit. There was couches in there, and then just a lot more still pop cans and other trash.
The next photograph, what do you see there?
There we have more clothing. I think there was a pair of shoes in there. And that was...
Okay. More soda cans, is that right?
Yes.
Next photograph.
That is right towards the bottom part of the burn pile now. I'm starting to get rid of a lot of the bigger trash there. We're getting now down to where we had to start starting to sift through some things.
Okay. Next photograph.
That is at the bottom also. That is a part where we did start finding small chunks of bone fragments.
Next photograph.
That's in the same area, and that is just more trash and a little bit of clothing and stuff still buried in there.
Okay. Next photo.
That's also down in the same bottom part of the burn pit area. That's where we started to find the bulk of the bone at, into about that layer of trash there.
Next photo.
This one here, I think, is where they found a decent size piece of bone. The BCI agents believe that it might have been a piece of skull cap, but obviously they weren't 100% sure until everything got sent off for autopsy.
Next photograph.
That's a piece of what they believe to be a piece of skull cap right there in that guy's hand.
Your Honor, may we approach?
Yes.
Mr. Rose, you indicated that it was your all belief that this was a fragment from a skull. Is that right?
Yes.
Next photo.
That photo there is, where the A is, I believe, is that piece of skull cap on the ground.
Next photo.
That is the piece that we referred to as what we thought to believe possibly was a piece of skull.
Next photograph.
That is a fuel can. They did say, Sheriff's Office did advise us that they stated that they did use liquids to keep the fire burning. So that was sitting right at the top of the hill beside the pile.
Next photograph.
This photo here is one of the BCI members talking to one of the sheriff's office. You can see the trash in behind them.
Okay. Next photograph.
This is a photo down towards the bottom of the burn pit where we started to find the bone fragments. We had a few buckets down there that, as we were sifting through any pieces of bone that we believed were bone, we started gathering in, putting in the buckets, and the buckets were getting carried up the hill to be placed on the table to be wrapped and packaged.
Okay. Next photograph.
There's another photo there. You can see in my hand there, with the blue gloves on, I have a bunch of small pieces of bone fragment in that hand. They are being placed actually into one of the boxes right there on the ground also.
This would be you?
Yes.
Right? And this would be your hand with those
Yes.
items that you believe to be bone at the time, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And is this the box that you were referring to?
Yes.
Okay, and again, what was that box for?
The box is where all these small bones were placed and then wrapped in foil to be transported.
What is this photo?
That's another photo there with the box on the ground with a bunch of bone fragment in it.
This would be a bone fragment in the center
Yes.
of the photo. And what is this a photograph of?
That is just a little bit closer up of the last photo and of us slowly just sifting through more of the ash and finding what we can. That is another close-up of the bones in that box.
Next photo.
That would be a different angle of us going through the ash still and more bones in the box.
Another photo.
That is an overhead area of where we started to find all the bone in that area right there towards the bottom of the burn pile.
Next photo.
That was a little bit later in the day. They brought the canopy out to try to keep everybody that was in the dig, try to keep them a little bit cooler. And that is another photo from the same area where we started to find all the bone fragment.
Next photo.
That is another photo of finding the bone fragment, just a little bit of a different angle from the previous photo.
Next photo.
That is a photo of them getting some of the trash out of the areas we started to expand out from where we started to find the bone.
Next photo.
That is the area of where we started moving back on the hillside a little more, getting some trash out of the area using the 5-gallon bucket so it could keep it as controlled and as we were still sifting through.
Next photo.
That is just getting rid of more trash. There's lots of clay pots and types of dishes thrown out there also. So that is them getting rid of more trash.
All right. You did not actually take these photos, correct?
These ones here I did not. These are photos from BCI.
Okay. However, you were on the scene that day?
Yes.
Okay. Are these photos, even though you did not take them, clear and accurate depictions of what that scene looked like on that day?
Yes.
Keegan, you indicated that you're a firefighter part-time?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are you familiar with the smell of burning flesh?
Yes.
Okay. Can you describe to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what that smells like?
Coach. Jury's instructed to disregard the prior question and begin at the beginning of the answer, perhaps.
With that, Your Honor, the state has no further questions.
All right, thank you. Mr. Baum?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Rose. I just have a couple questions for you. You said earlier your total training in this is purely basically sort of your understudy as Dr. Cummins.
Yes.
You're as Dr. Cummins' understudy, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you have no formal training on any of this beyond your role with Dr. Cummins, correct?
Negative. Besides my background in fire and EMS, yes.
Okay. You're not a doctor or an
No.
anthropologist or anything of that nature?
No.
Okay. So when you're talking about the guesses about what things were that was found, you guess that it was bone and all of the rest of that information is just sort of speculative, is that correct?
Yes, it was 100% until we take it to Montgomery County and then they proved to us what it
Okay.
is.
So whatever testimony might be gleaned from those persons, that would actually determine what in fact those things might have been.
Yes.
Anything you talked about, what you found was purely speculative based on what you and those persons saw?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Nothing further. Thank you.
Redirect, please.
Just briefly, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
With respect to your duties and responsibilities in investigating sites of death, isn't it true that you never know things until you send them off to the coroner's office? Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. You have an idea, that's why you investigate, and then you send it off for confirmation. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Anything further, Mr. Baum?
No follow-up, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, thank you. You may stand down.
Thank you, sir.
Next witness, gentlemen.
Thank you. The state would like to call Erica Jimenez.
Please raise your right hand. Solemnly swear the testimony you're about to provide in this cause is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but truth, so help God.
I do.
All right, please be seated. Once you're comfortable, if you could pull the microphone in front of you.
Should I remove my mask?
Yes, please. Another thing too, we have the press monitoring this on a live feed, and they may want to use your picture. Do you object to that?
No, I do not.
Okay, then you can take a picture or publish your picture. All right, go ahead, Mr. Pearson.
Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you state your name, spelling your last name for the record, please?
Erica Jimenez, Jimenez.
Okay. Where are you employed?
I work for the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation.
Okay, and how long have you been employed there?
Approximately 18 years.
And what do you do for the BCI?
I am a DNA analyst.
Okay. Can you talk about your duties and responsibility, please?
Yes, I analyze evidence for the presence of body fluids such as blood and semen. I do DNA analysis on evidence samples as well as reference samples. I write reports, technically review reports, and testify in the court of law.
All right. You said you've been employed there for how long? 18 years?
18 years.
What type of education did you go through to become a DNA analyst?
I have a Bachelor of Science degree in biology from the University of Akron with a specialization in microbiology and a minor in chemistry.
Did you have to go through any on-the-job training or any other training to become an analyst?
Yes, when I first started, I went through approximately 1 year of specialized DNA training. I've also worked for a private DNA testing facility called Orchid Cellmark. So when I worked there, I went through another year of training with them, and then I obtained my job back at BCI and went through training again.
Do you have any yearly training or continuing education training that you have to go through?
Yes, we're required to take 8 hours of continuing education, but DNA is always changing and evolving, so we're constantly training into new techniques and things like that.
Okay, so it would be safe to say that you go above that minimum requirement each year?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Is your lab certified?
Yes, we are.
Can you go in a little bit more detail on what you do on a day-to-day basis?
I obtain paperwork from all the lab work that's done, and I go through that and I compare the DNA profiles from evidence samples to DNA profiles from reference samples to see if those people can be included or excluded as contributing to those samples or as being involved in the case. So that's my daily job. I'm also the local CODIS administrator, so I have those duties as well.
Okay. Got to define and talk about some things for a bit, okay?
Sure.
You talked about reference samples. What are reference samples?
Those are known samples that come directly from an individual so that we know that's their DNA profile, that came directly from them. It's usually a swabbing from the inside of the cheek, and that way we know that's their DNA profile, and we can compare it to evidence samples left at the scene of a crime.
And what is CODIS?
CODIS stands for the Combined DNA Index System. It's a databank of profiles from cases as well as offender samples and missing persons as well.
This case did not deal with CODIS, is that correct?
No, not directly.
All right, so we can leave that to the side. What about this particular case that you're here about? You looked over information for this case, is that right?
Yes, I did. I was the technical reviewer on this case.
Okay, what does that mean?
So every case that goes through the lab has a report writer who writes the results into a report and issues it to the agency that submitted the items. And then there's always a person who tech reviews that, who basically does the exact same thing that the report writer does, make sure that all the proper protocols were followed, every step was followed, make sure that they would analyze, if they would analyze any other items, they would suggest that. They make sure that the conclusions that they came to, the tech reviewer comes to, matches what the report writer came to. So it's basically making sure that everything was done correctly in the report. And we do that on every case that goes out the door. So that in situations like this, where maybe the report writer might not be available to testify, the tech reviewer could step in and testify for them.
Okay. I'm going to have you take a look. My first witness, Your Honor.
Yes, go ahead, please.
You have yours evening.
I think so. Is it 4 pages?
Yes.
Yep.
Can I have you take a look at what's been marked as State's Exhibit FFF? Does that look familiar to you?
Yes, this is the DNA report generated by Hallie Dreyer, the original report writer.
Okay, so when you're referencing the report, that's the report that we're talking about, is that right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and it was written by, the report writer is Hallie Dreyer?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know where Hallie is right now?
She's on medical leave.
Okay. So what does so even though Hallie was a report writer, you were the tech reviewer, is that correct?
Yes.
So you are actually familiar with this particular case, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, what did Hallie do with respect to this case?
She compiled all the data from all the steps within the lab, and then, like I said earlier, she looked at the evidence samples and determined what she could make comparisons to, and then she determined what reference samples we needed to look at and compare to see if those people could be included or excluded as being part of the case.
Okay. Now, before we go into the specifics of the report, have you ever been a report writer?
Yes.
Okay. Are you a report writer now on some items?
Yes, that's my daily job.
Okay. So sometimes is it that you're a tech reviewer and sometimes you're a report writer?
Yes, everyone that does DNA in our lab can write reports and technically review reports.
Okay. So you're not just a full-time tech reviewer?
No.
All right. Why don't we go over the contents of this report if we could, please?
Okay. Do you?
If you could just start with page 1.
Okay, so on the first page, can they see this?
They cannot.
Okay. On the first page, it has the submitting agency, the listed suspects and victims, the BCI case number, as well as the agency's case number, the date the analysis started, the date the report was issued, and then it has all of the items that were submitted for the case and the dates that they were submitted. That's what's on the first page.
Okay. And then you indicate that there are references numbers to everything. Is that correct?
Yeah, so anytime a case comes into BCI, it gets a unique BCI case number, and then each item within that case gets a unique item number. So in this case, there's actually 3 different case numbers for the different aspects of the case. In the first case number, there were 13 items submitted. Under the second case number, there were 4 items submitted, and under the final case number, there was 1 item submitted.
Okay. Just to be clear, sometimes items are used for one particular purpose and then used for another particular purpose. Would that be right?
I'm not sure what you mean.
You may try and get fingerprints from an item as well as DNA from an item, correct?
Yes, so we have different sections at BCI, such as latent prints, chemistry, firearms, and there are times when one item will have to be looked at by multiple sections, depending on what we're trying to find from that item.
Do they get different case numbers?
Not a different case number, but they would get different reports.
Okay, so they get individual reports but keep the same case number throughout your whole system.
Yes.
So there are a list of how many items that were submitted for analysis?
On my report, there are 16 items that were analyzed for DNA,
Okay.
or by the DNA section, I should say.
Now, before we get into those findings, what is DNA?
DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It's a long string-like molecule found in every cell within your body. Each person gets half of their DNA from their mom and half of their DNA from their dad. It's a genetic blueprint of life. It determines whether you have brown eyes or blue eyes, blonde hair or brown hair.
And you indicated that it is specific to each individual, or no?
Yes, with the exception of identical twins, no 2 people have the same DNA profile.
And you work at BCI, Bureau of Criminal Investigation, is that correct?
Yes.
And this is a tool in law enforcement, is that right?
Yes.
How long has DNA analysis been around?
At BCI, we've been doing DNA since 1998, but it's been around since several years before that.
How do you extract DNA, look at DNA, and compare DNA?
There's 4 steps to a DNA process. The first is called extraction, and that's where we get the DNA from the item that we are interested in looking at. So if it's a swab or a shirt with blood on it, we're trying to get the DNA off of that item, off of that swab, off of that shirt, and into a tube, into a workable form. The next step is called quantification. That's where we determine how much DNA we were able to get from that sample to see if we can go forward with the process. The third step is called amplification, and that's where it's like a chemical Xeroxing process. So we're making copies of the specific areas of the DNA that we're interested in looking at. So between individuals, 99.9% of our DNA is the same. It's that 0.1% of DNA that's different between us that we want to look at, so we can compare the differences between 2 people. And so that's the the process we use to be able to see the DNA. And then the final step is called the comparison step, and that's where I take the pictures. It looks like an electropharogram, if you've ever seen, or excuse me, an EKG for your heart. It's called an electropharogram, and it's like a series of peaks, and they have numbers associated with them. And so, like I said earlier, you get half from your mom and half from your dad. So a profile from one person at each of these locations would either have 1 or 2 peaks, because you can get the same profile from your parents. So if you were a 15-16, that means one parent gave you a 15 and one parent gave you a 16. But if you're just a 16, then both parents at that particular location gave you the same DNA type. And we look at 21 different locations on the DNA. And then in the comparison process, I'm looking at that picture of the evidence and comparing it to the pictures from the reference samples that I know came from specific people, and I'm comparing those to see if that person is included in this sample.
Do you use any tools, microscope? Do you look at it with the naked eye? How do you do it?
Most of it's, we have different instruments that we use. So we use a robot for the quantification and the amplification part. And then the final step is also another instrument that we use, but there's no microscopes involved.
How much do you have to amplify?
We try to amplify in 1 nanogram, which is very small, but sometimes it's even less than that we can get a good profile from.
So that's how small it is that you can see it?
No, you can't see it. It's super tiny. It's in a tube. It's in a liquid form, and so the DNA, we bring our samples up in like 30 microliters, which is super small, but there could be 100 nanograms in that tiny tube, or there could be 0.1 nanogram in there. You can't see it.
What type of things can you get DNA off of?
So earlier when I said the DNA, I said no 2 people have the same DNA. Well, the DNA within a person is the same throughout. So the DNA in a person's blood, saliva, semen for males, skin cells, all of that would be the same throughout one person, which is why it's helpful for crime scenes, because the DNA at a crime scene left in the form of blood can be compared to a reference sample in the form of an oral swab. So you can get DNA from all those samples I just mentioned.
Is DNA always left?
No, a lot of factors have to go into whether DNA is left behind, especially for touch DNA. So if I'm drinking a soda and I'm holding that soda and drinking it, I would expect to leave a little bit of DNA on the outside of that can, but if I was vigorously holding it, or if I was sweating, or if I held it for a longer period of time, I'd be more likely to leave my DNA on it than I would if I just picked it up and set it back down. I also wash my hands a lot just based on my job. So we've done studies at work where we swab each other's hands, and you won't get any DNA from my hands because I'm constantly washing off those cells that some other people that don't wash as much would slough off when it's swabbed. So just a lot of factors go into whether DNA is left behind or not.
Do some people leave more DNA than others?
Yes, there are people called shedders that actually leave more DNA just naturally behind than other people.
Okay, and you discussed touch DNA.
Mm-hmm.
DNA can come off of what other items of the body?
Anything. So like when you wear a shirt and you like are moving and things like that, areas that are rubbing against it's not really touch DNA, it's like wear DNA, but most people touch things with their hands, so that's kind of what we're talking about when we say touch. But you can leave DNA from other areas of your body, or if you swab different areas of your body, you would get more DNA from like your armpit than you would from maybe the outside of your arm. So it just depends where you're swabbing. Okay.
And I believe you said earlier it could come from sweat and saliva.
Yeah, so when you sweat, you're wet and you seem to leave more cells behind. So that does help leave more DNA.
And you can leave it. It is also found in your hair as well. Is that right?
The roots of your hair we can get DNA from. So it usually has to be pulled hair. But the best source of DNA, honestly, is body fluids like saliva and blood and semen.
Do you always get DNA from those items?
Not always. Like I said, a lot of factors go into play. How long the item's been in a certain environment. If it's hot outside and the item's left outside, the DNA might go away quicker. If it's been rained on, if it's not preserved correctly, if it's stored but it's in a hot location, that could not damage the DNA, but that could make the DNA not last as long as something that's stored in a cool, dry location.
Okay. And I think you answered my next question, that there is the time span for DNA to be able to be detected varies. Is that right? Based on the environment?
Yeah, DNA can last on items for years. I mean, I've tested items that have been in storage for 40 years and got DNA off of them.
Okay. So when you receive something in a lab, you don't know, and you find DNA. You don't know how long that DNA has been there. Is that correct?
Correct. We can't tell how it got there or when it got there. We can only say what we find on the item.
Okay. Let's go back to the report, if we can.
Okay.
Haley made findings, is that right?
She did.
Okay, can you go over that, please?
Sure. Is there any way for them to see this or no?
I believe there is.
I don't know. It might be easier, but I can go through it and just talk about it.
Just give me a couple of moments. We can put it up.
My challenge is that I don't know that.
They can see that.
Have to be able to see that small item.
That's true.
And I believe we're on page 2, is that right?
This is page 1, but I kind of talked about it earlier. If you want to scroll down, here's where I mentioned the items that were submitted and the date. So each time something is submitted that's new to the same case, it'll get that unique item number. And so on July 27th, Detective Lieutenant Ed Down submitted items 2 and 3, and then it lists exactly what items 2 and 3 were submitted as. And then it keeps going. The next date is the 29th of July, 2020, and then so on and so forth. Down at the bottom, so the case number, when it changes or when there's another case that's being cross-referenced, that's what we call it when we put multiple cases in one report, it'll have another case number in front of it. So if you see down there, yep, that says 217728. So these particular items were submitted under a different case, but they are being reported under this case. In this instance, it was 2 toothbrushes and a hairbrush. And then item 4, which is probably a more pertinent one, is oral swab from Diana Whitaker, which is the mother of James Whitaker Jr. And then on the second page at the top, again, that's another case number that was cross-referenced. It is 218929, and that was actually submitted from the Montgomery County Coroner's Office, and those were submitted as a brown paper bag containing bones. So then the first set of conclusions in this report are the kinship conclusions. So the bones, when they came in, they were unidentified. We call those unidentified human remains. And we were trying to see who those remains could be from. So we were asked to compare the remains, the DNA from the bone, to the DNA from Diana Whitaker to see if it could be a biological child of Diana Whitaker. And we concluded that we were able to get profiles from the bones as well as Diana Whitaker. And we concluded that Diana Whitaker cannot be excluded as being the biological mother of the donor of the DNA from the bones. And then based on, anytime we have an inclusion, we have to give a statistic to show how rare or common the profile is within the general population. Well, for single source parentage, which is kind of what we did with the bones compared to Diana, since we didn't have a standard from Mr. Whitaker's father, we had to do a single parentage. We say how likely it is that she is the mother. So in this case, the evidence is 76,150 times more likely that Diana Whitaker is the biological mother of the donor of the DNA from the bones than a random individual. So we're basically saying we believe this is her biological child. So based on these results, we use the bones as the reference sample from James Whitaker Jr. Since we didn't actually have a standard or a reference directly from him, we only had the remains in the form of bones. So then throughout my report, if anything was consistent with the profile from the bones, we said that it was consistent with James Whitaker Jr. for future reference.
All right. And you can talk about the rest of the report, please.
Sure. So items 2 and 3 were submitted as swabs from stain from the basement floor. Both of those were. We were asked to test for blood, and we were also asked to test for human blood. So we have 2 different tests we do for blood at BCI. We usually, on most cases, just do a presumptive test saying, yes, this is presumptive positive for blood. There's usually not a question of whether it's human or not, but sometimes there is. And in this case, we were asked to see if that blood was human. There was some concern that it might not have been. So we went the step further and confirmed that it was human blood that was identified. And then we did DNA on those samples. And both of those samples from the basement floor came back to match or be consistent with Michael Dixon. And the statistic, like I said, we have to say how rare that profile is within the general population. And so the estimated frequency of occurrence of the DNA profile is rarer than 1 in 1 trillion. So it's a very rare profile. That number is 1,000 times the world's population. So we believe that this is consistent with Michael Dixon, or is Michael Dixon.
So you use that as conclusive evidence to move on, is that right?
Yeah, so then the next sample, we had his reference sample, which is item 5. It says DNA standard, and that's how I was able to do that comparison. I looked at the evidence and then compared it to his standard, as well as the bone sample, as well as Diana Whitaker. So I was able to exclude Diana and James Whitaker from being part of that sample because they were excluded. It's consistent with Michael Dixon.
I have a question.
Sure.
Why is it that you do not wait until the results are 100% that it's whom the results pointed to be?
What do you mean by 100%?
Are you able to ever get a 100% analysis? Because
Oh, I see what you're saying. So, because we're not testing your entire DNA throughout your body, we're only looking at 21 locations on the DNA. There's thousands of locations we could look at. We can never say, this is this person. We never report identity. Some labs will. When it's this rare, they will just automatically report, we identify this person as, or this sample as this person. At our lab, we choose to report it this way, that it's rarer than 1 in 1 trillion, and that it's consistent with the person.
okay. So that's just part of what do the national standards suggest you do?
Actually, most labs do it this way, but just because there's always that identical twin that could be out there, so I think most labs err on the side of just reporting it like this.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt you.
Okay, so then we have items 6 and 7, which were, item 6 is a swab from floor area A, and item 7 was a swab from a cardboard area B. We just looked at those to see if they were presumptive positive for blood, and they were. We did not take those samples forward for DNA. We don't always test everything that's submitted. We try to choose the most probative samples, and in this case, I think Special Agent Phelps actually requested that we do samples that I'm going to talk about in a minute, so I think that's why we chose not to do DNA on these 2 samples.
Why don't you do everything?
If we did everything, we would not be able to get as many cases done. I mean, you could submit thousands of things from every case, so we try to choose the most probative and what's going to answer the most questions for every case that we do.
Okay.
And you can always request to go back and do more. Once you get our report, anybody can call and say, hey, I really think these samples need to be analyzed, and we would happily go back and work those for you. The next sample is item 8, and they were swabs from a deer sled. We looked at that sample for blood. There was no blood identified. Therefore, we did not take it forward for DNA.
Why not?
In this case, we were told that it's possible that the bones were moved on this deer sled, and so we were looking for blood that could be from the crime at hand, and not finding blood on there, we chose to stop. You could do DNA on it, but if this deer sled was used by the victim or suspect at some other time, their DNA could be on there for any reason. So the blood was really the main thing that we were looking for on the item.
Would it be safe to say that you weren't looking for if James Whitaker ever used this sled or ever touched it or ever sweated on it? You were
Correct.
wanting to know if his blood was ever on it. Is that accurate?
Correct. Very accurate.
Okay. Next item.
Items 9 and 11 are in the next box. Item 9 was swabs from a refrigerator, and item 11 was swabs from a floor. They were both presumptive positive for blood. They were both very weak blood samples. The DNA profile that we got was not sufficient for comparison. So sometimes, even though something's positive for blood, it'll give a very, very partial profile, or to give a mixture of DNA that's very low and insufficient and is dropping below our reporting standards. So in this case, that's what happened with these, is that there was just not enough data there to make any sort of comparisons to. There's some data there, just nothing that I could ever compare to any sort of reference sample. So I can't do anything with these items. I have to report them as insufficient. Item 10 was submitted as swabs from a ceiling. That sample was presumptive positive for blood, and the DNA profile was consistent with James Whitaker Jr. And again, the estimated frequency of occurrence of this profile was rarer than 1 in 1 trillion as well. So it's consistent with James Whitaker Jr. I would expect to have to test over 1 trillion people to find this profile again. Therefore, we believe it is James Whitaker Jr. It's consistent with him.
Okay.
This is kind of a repeated, the firearm, which is the Winchester firearm, was presumptive positive for blood. So if you go to the next slide, we actually took 6 different swabbings from this item. I actually have a picture, I don't know if you want that, to show where or I can just talk about them.
There's no way for me to display.
Okay, that's fine.
And I can't.
That's okay.
Sorry.
So we took 6 different swabbings. The first was from the trigger and interior guard. Let's talk about the DNA results for that. So the part of the gun that was presumptive positive for blood was the interior swabbing from the barrel. That was the only part that was positive for blood. There was no other stains noted. There was stains noted on the outside barrel, but they were negative for blood. So when we report 12 presumptive positive for blood, that just means on the whole item, we did find some presumptive positive blood staining on there. So the trigger grip in DNA was a mixture of 2 contributors, and it's consistent with contributions from both Michael Dixon and James Whitaker Jr. And then we did a statistic to show how rare that mixture was, and the estimated proportion of the population that cannot be excluded as possible contributors to the mixture of DNA profiles is 1 in 8 billion unrelated individuals, and Diana Whitaker was excluded from that. So it's a 2-person mixture, and it looks like it's a mixture of these 2 individuals.
Let's go back. It was presumptive positive for blood, the firearm?
Yes.
And did you test it for DNA?
Yeah, so we took these 6 different swabbings and we tested 3 of them. 12.6, if you scroll down. So 12.6 was the swabbing from the interior barrel, and that's what was that presumptive positive for blood. And the DNA profile was not sufficient for comparison. Again, it looked like a low-level mixture of individuals that it's so low I can't do anything with. I can't make any comparisons.
But you are able to say that it's blood?
Yes, it was presumptive positive for blood on the inside of the barrel, yes.
Were you able to determine whether it was human blood or animal blood?
We did not do that on that particular sample.
Okay, did you do it on other samples?
Just items 2 and 3 that we were asked to do earlier.
Okay. Go ahead, I think I interrupted you. Were you right here, 12.2?
Yes, so we did not do DNA analysis on 3 of the items that were swabbed on the gun. So one is the grip area, which is the back. It's a long gun, a long like rifle gun. So where the grip in the back, we didn't do DNA on that, but we did swab it. The levers and buttons on various areas of the gun, we didn't do DNA on those. And then the external barrel, so the front of the barrel, we did test that for blood. It was negative, so we didn't take that forward for DNA. 12.3 was the fore end. So on the long barrel, there's a kind of a place where you put your hand to hold. That's the swabbing that I'm talking about for that. We took that sample forward for DNA. It was a mixture, but there was one major contributor, which that just means when I look at that picture with the peaks, there's one person, a single source profile throughout that is a lot higher or in greater amounts than the other DNA that's there that's very low. I can't make any comparisons to those. I can only compare to that major profile. And that major profile was consistent with Michael Dixon. Again, the statistic is rarer than 1 in 1 trillion. And then Diana and James are both excluded as the major. They aren't in that major profile. The remainder of the mixture, again, not suitable for any sort of comparison. It's just kind of some DNA that's down low that I can't make any comparisons to. And then there was also a case in with that gun that it looked like it went over the gun or a part of the gun, and that was not examined. And then item 13 was a different firearm. It was a Remington gun. We were just asked to look at that for blood. There were no stains for analysis, so there was no blood testing that needed to be done because we didn't see any red-brown staining.
Okay. And anything of significance with respect to her remarks?
No, just we consumed some samples, so anytime we consume something, we put that in the report. So 9, 10, and 11 were all consumed, meaning we can't go back to them and retest if we had to. And then that's basically it. Oh, the toothbrush and the hairbrush, we didn't do anything with those samples since we had the bones that were consistent with being from James Whitaker. We didn't feel that we needed to test the toothbrush and hairbrush that were supposedly his personal items. We didn't test those.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I just have a few follow-up questions and I'll be done.
Okay.
With respect to the DNA and the mixtures, are you able to determine who touched one item first or one item second, or how the mixture occurred?
No.
Even though there are multiple persons' DNA on these items, again, same question. If there's not a mixture, are you able to determine who touched items first and who touched items last?
No.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Ross?
Thank you, Your Honor.
No.
Good afternoon, Ms. Jimenez. I just have a few questions for you. You've already stated, and I just want to confirm it as correct, that you can't determine when when the DNA gets onto these items, correct?
Correct.
Your office essentially only tests for the presence of the DNA
That's correct.
and nothing more.
Correct.
And not only can you not test when, you can't even test how or anything of that nature, right?
That's true.
Okay. So you would have no way of testifying or knowing how any of this DNA got on any of these items, correct?
That is correct.
And I just want to be quite clear. When you tested and said that the firearm, the Winchester firearm, was positive for blood,
Yes.
you are unable to say with any degree of certainty whether it's human blood or non-human blood, correct?
Correct. We did not take that swabbing forward for human blood testing,
Okay.
just for DNA.
Sure. So,
Oh, actually, but I did get DNA from that sample, so there is human blood there, because it's a mixture of people, but I can't do anything. I can't compare to it. I can't say whose it is.
so you know that it's
So there is
Human DNA?
There's human DNA there, whether it's from the blood or from somebody cleaning the inside of the barrel. I can't say that because it was such a weak blood sample, and
Sure.
it's a mixture. So I can't say.
So you got some DNA from the inside of the barrel.
Yes.
You don't know if it even came from the blood.
Right, I can't say, but it is presumptive positive blood for blood, but it's a mixture, so I can't say what that.
Sure. And I just want to be quite clear.
Yes.
So the DNA could have come from the blood, or it could have been the blood was separate from the DNA and it could have been DNA from something else.
Correct.
Okay. So all we know is that there was some human DNA in there.
Right.
No idea who that DNA belonged to.
Correct. Can't say because it's too low.
Right. And no idea whether the blood was human blood or non-human blood or what it was or whether that DNA even came from the human blood.
Correct. Correct.
Okay. I have nothing further. Thank you, ma'am.
Redirect.
Just one follow-up question.
In the years of DNA analysis, that's always been the case that you don't know when DNA has been on an item, correct? Got
That's
on
correct.
an item.
Yep.
Or how long that it's been on an item. Is that right?
Yes.
Correct. All right. Thank you. No further questions.
Any further
No
questions?
questions, Your Honor.
This is yours. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, ma'am. You may step down.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
What can we approach? All right, that will conclude today's testimony. So we're going to have you back at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And as I've told you before, do not discuss the case among yourselves or do not permit anybody to discuss it with you or in your presence. It is your duty not to form or express any opinion on the case until it is finally submitted to you. So please be here by 9 o'clock tomorrow so we can start on time. Thank you. The jury at this time has left. Anything we need to discuss before we wrap things up for the day?
Not from the state, Your Honor. Thank you.
We have sort of talked about moving things into evidence. Are we doing that now, sort of
Well,
at the end? or-
you preferred that we did it after witnesses, we all agreed, and then we did not follow that recommendation at all, so sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I'm just
So,
wondering how.
because we failed to follow that, I figured we'd just continue to fail to follow that, and then we could wrap it all up. We can do it now, or we could do it tomorrow before we close.
I don't really care. I just wanted to bring it up because I figured
Okay.
that it's fine.
Why don't we do it at the end?
Just now at this point, just do it all at the end.
Since we haven't been keeping up with it.
I would ask them, would you be able to get me just a list of your current exhibits?
Yeah, most of them are going to come in tomorrow, but
Sure.
we'll give you what we have.
I
now.
might have only been about like 7 or 8, I think.
Not been a lot.
Because I feel like some of yours have been like dual. Or, like one of the videos, I think was 5 videos, that was all II or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can use your list of it.
Okay, that's fine, no problem.
Cool.
And then, Your Honor, the last thing is I just sent to your court, your administrator, the proposed jury instructions, the defense's proposed jury instructions. So I will sign those for filing tomorrow, but I prefer to copy you if they do.
Okay.
Do you want your instructions, proposed instructions filed with the court?
Yes, please.
Oh, thank you.
And then will we have the court's proposed jury instructions tomorrow at the end of the day, or will it be waiting until?
Probably Monday.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. Anything else, gentlemen?
No, sir.
No? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you in the morning.
Yes.
Stephanie. I was just trying to say that thing is still here.
Maybe get first one.
Okay.